First to the news, and the Gillard government's carbon tax proposal has now been picked through for a couple of days. Peter Shergold, the household compensation package is probably one of the centrepieces of the plan. How effective do you think this will be?
Well, you've got a challenge here. How do you give households compensation, which you need to for low-income earners, but also make sure they change their behaviour? Because like industry, if they don't change their behaviour in energy consumption, then obviously it's not going to have the effect you want. I think the way they're doing it in giving compensation through the tax system, social security system, is the way to go. But obviously you're also going to have to do things like give support with, improving home insulation, giving you more information on smart meters and so on. So that's going to be, I think, the next challenge.
Now, also in the past month, there's been quite a landmark ruling against Centro property directors, and it really has rocked corporate Australia. The federal court basically found that directors of this group broke the law because they approved incorrect financial accounts. The judge said there's no dishonesty involved, but basically they didn't read, they didn't understand or focus. This was his words. I mean, we've had a flood of experts deciding what it means for corporate Australia and directors' responsibilities. Perhaps a timely reminder as well for responsibilities of those on not-for-profit boards.
Well, I think it is. I mean, as a company director, you're very nervous when you read this, because what ASIC argued and the court agreed was that as a director you've got to have sufficient financial literacy that you can understand what you're presenting to shareholders or to those who are giving you money. Now, you think, well, maybe in not-for-profit organisations it doesn't matter as much, they're not. But in fact, those financial statements are often very complicated because you've got money from the sale of services, you've got money from philanthropy, money for government grants. Yeah. Often that money has different conditions attached to it. It's actually quite difficult to give a true and genuine picture of your financial capability and the financial status of your organisation. I think for not-for-profit board members, just as if you're a board member on a private sector or the government sector, you've got to have sufficient financial literacy that you understand what you're presenting.
Also, last week the federal government released the final report on the scoping study for the national not-for-profit regulator, Peter. Tell us about some of the key recommendations to come out of this.
Well, look, from the middle of next year we are going to have established the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission. I think everybody in the sector thinks in principle this is a really good thing, and this final report shows us how we'll have a single regulator for all not-for-profit organisations under a principles-based regulatory framework, and that regulator will decide upon charitable status and so on. But the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating here, and I'm a little bit nervous about some of the language used in this report, talking about long-term goals. The key here is that the Commonwealth is going to have to reach agreement with the states and territories if we are going to have a single national regulatory system. And I think everybody wants to achieve this. The difficulty is it going to be achieved? Because if it's not achieved quickly, the danger is that, in fact, it could make the level of regulation actually more complex than it is at the moment.
Also news this month, Peter, the chair of the Implementation Taskforce for the Australian Charities and the Not-for-Profit Commission has actually been appointed. Tell us more about Susan Pascoe, but also the role of the Implementation Taskforce.
OK, so the Implementation Taskforce is going to have the responsibility over this next 12 months to set inside all the arrangements for the setting up of the Commission. Very important. Susan Pascoe, I think, very good, generally been welcomed by the sector. She was the CEO of the Catholic Education Commission in Victoria, a commissioner of the Victorian State Services Authority, someone who has got very good background both in the sector and in government, and I think she'll be a good person to lead the task force.
In the past year, leading business minds have been really praising the virtues of a relatively new concept, shared value. But in the past month, it's been debated more fiercely than ever after a new report from Dalberg Global Development Advisors. This report considers concerns like corporate social responsibility and the triple bottom line as soft and basically just distractions. To be good citizens, it argues companies should just focus on the bottom line. This is Dalberg's Director of Thought Leadership, Daniel Altman, explaining the concept to me of the single bottom line when he was in Australia recently.
To take the long view, these developing countries are going to be markets for the companies in rich countries in the future. Their consumers are going to be consumers for all of us. And the stability of these countries and the growth that they have is going to help all of us. So if you take a long enough view, I don't think you really need corporate social responsibility. I think you'll see that just looking at your balance sheet with a long enough time horizon, all of these supposedly social investments make sense from a profit perspective too. Shared value is something of a crutch, actually. I think that it persuades companies to set up new decision-making bodies that aren't necessarily at the core of their business. And I think it's better to focus on the core of your business, but with a long enough time horizon that you can see the benefits of disseminating these, the impact of your economic growth through the developing communities where you do business.
But what are you saying that's so different? Don't corporations already take the longer-term view?
I don't think they really take such a long-term view. I think that they're trying to hit their quarterly earnings numbers. They have chief executives who don't necessarily think they're going to be in their jobs for 10 or 20 years, and so they have a much shorter time horizon than they ought to. When they do take the long-term view, I think they're going to see that taking on an individual project in a developing country is going to create gains much greater than they might expect in the future. They're going to be approached to do new projects. They're going to see the consumer markets grow. And they don't have to look at a double or triple bottom line to see that this is a good idea. It's a single bottom line. It's a profit-maximizing action as long as you look far enough into the future.
All right, Peter Shergold, what did you think of that report? And tell us also how you think it's been broadly received.
Well, it certainly created a bit of a furore in the blogosphere. There's lots of tweets going on about it. I think, in truth, some of what Daniel was saying is being misinterpreted, that, you don't need CSR or you don't need shared value anymore. The crunch is, what he's saying, and there's a lot of truth in this, is if only corporations took a sufficiently long-term view, then they would do corporate social responsibility naturally, because it improves profit and sustainability, so that corporate image, reputation, employee loyalty would drive sensible investment decisions. But from my perspective, the difficulty, as we've seen in the GFC, is that too often companies didn't have that long-term perspective. And at least if you have a CSR framework or you have a commitment to shared value, then it gets company directors to actually look at the long term.